مرحبا وأهلا بكم في برنامج داخل واشنطن. معكم مضيفكم روبرت ساتلوف. لقد تغيرت الانتخابات. سابقا كانت الحملة الانتخابية تنتهي بمجرد وصول الناخبين إلى المراكز للإدلاء بأصواتهم، وذلك لأن فرز الأصوات كان إجراء شكليا تقنيا يتم إسناده إلى السيدات والسادة المتقاعدين المتطوعين بوقتهم كواجب مدني. اليوم أصبح فرز الأصوات جزءاً من العملية السياسية تماماً مثل الحملات الانتخابية. فرز الأصوات هو جانب واحد من العديد من جوانب انتخاباتنا التي أصبحت هدفاً سياسياً في السنوات الأخيرة، وخاصة بعد أن أشعلتها اتهامات كاذبة بأن جو بايدن سرق انتخابات من دونالد ترامب. وبناء على ذلك أقرت بعض الولايات المنتشرة في البلاد بعض القوانين ووضعت مسؤولين في مناسب مهمتها منع حدوث هذه السرقات الوهمية مرة أخرى. ولتوضيح الكيفية التي أصبحت فيها الانتخابات جزءاً عن الحملات السياسية وماذا يعني ذلك لديمقراطية أمريكا، يسعدني أن أرحب بصديقي وهو واحد من الخبراء البارزين في أمريكا في مجال الانتخابات، ديفيد بيكر. Welcome back to داخل Washington. Another election is upon us, finally. But all over the country, there are new rules governing how people vote, rules that will affect when they can vote, the manner of their vote, and how these votes are counted. Let's take a closer look with a friend of mine who is America's leading expert on elections, election systems, and how we keep them fair. David Becker, delighted to have you with us, David.
Thanks for having me on again, Rob.
All right, let's begin, if we can, with 2020, our last big election. Have all the claims, all the accusations, all the lawsuits, all the appeals, have they finally been resolved and settled?
Well, and they were resolved actually long ago. By mid-December of 2020, there were over 60 court cases. There was the losing presidential candidate, former President Trump, was given every opportunity to bring evidence to a court or to law enforcement indicating there was any problem. And actually, the evidence showed the exact opposite, that it actually was the most secure, transparent, and verified election in American history. That's been proven time and time again. As we sit here now in October of 2022, it's been over 700 days since that 2020 election, and there's still not been a shred of evidence, not a single piece of evidence presented to any court or any law enforcement agency that would indicate any significant problems with the election, let alone one that could possibly overturn an election that actually wasn't all that close in terms of 21st century presidential elections. This was the widest margin of any presidential election, over 7 million popular votes between the two candidates. At a minimum, 3 states would have needed to flip to change the outcome. That was the widest margin of any presidential election in the United States in the 21st century, where Barack Obama wasn't on the ballot.
And yet an enormous number of national politicians elected to federal office, putting aside former President Trump, but a large number of elected federal officials claim otherwise.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. There are many people who are cynically either for profit, and many people are getting rich off of these lies, or for temporary political power, using this lie and lying to their own supporters about the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. They're not able to present any proof, but there are people who are getting rich off of it as people who are sincerely disappointed in the outcome. Are being targeted for a long-term grift. That said, there have been many who have stood up for the truth, many people from both parties, a lot of Republicans, a lot of people who voted for President Trump in the states who have stood up told the truth. We need more of that, because the more that people are lied to, the more that there are risks of political violence like we saw on January 6th, 2021.
All right, so let's look forward now to our November 2022 election. And just to remind audiences, in America, states make the rules, not the federal government. Is that correct?
That's right. We have one of the more decentralized election systems in the world, almost 10,000 different election jurisdictions within the 50 states and the District of Columbia that actually run elections. That's how we do it. There are some disadvantages to that because we have different systems of voting that people might be unfamiliar with if they move. There are also some advantages. It's one of the reasons our system is so resilient to attack or fraud, because it's really hard to infect the entire system. There's so many different parts of this. We actually run about 10,000 little elections on election day, not one big one. And one other thing that your viewers and listeners should realize is that the United States has some of the most complex ballots in the world. In many places in the world, they'll literally go to election day and vote on one thing, perhaps their member of parliament or something of that sort. And it's one race, and it's very easy to count very, very quickly. In the United States, we literally have dozens of races on every single ballot, sometimes dozens of pages of ballots to count. So that means that election officials who are highly professional in the United States have to take the time to count those ballots accurately and transparently, and to check and double check and triple check those ballot counts. That takes some time. So it's really important for anyone watching elections anywhere in the United States or anywhere in the world to realize we're likely not going to know too much on election night. That's okay. That's the way the process is supposed to work. It might take days or even weeks until we have final results that we can say for sure who won.
It's so true. I just got my absentee ballot in the mail in the state of Maryland, and it was 20 pages long.
Yeah, that's not that unusual. I mean, this is for a lot of people in a lot of states. They'll see a multi-page ballot with multiple races. There will be races at the top like governor and U.S. senator in a midterm election like this, but there will also be local races, county races, city races, school board races. There will be ballot initiatives where people can vote on particular issues that might be relevant in their jurisdictions. Issues related to women's health are very common in this election cycle. So it's going to take, each ballot takes a while to vote, it takes a while to research, and it takes a while to count, and that's normal.
So what have been some of the after effects of the 2020 election that impact the 2022 election?
So the grifters that have spread the lie about the 2020 election have inspired some state legislatures to pass some laws that were completely unnecessary, rather than celebrating the fact that we managed record high turnout in the middle of a global pandemic and the election withstood the most scrutiny we've ever had. Instead of celebrating that fact, they've actually attacked election officials. Election officials in this country are very, very tired. They've been abused and harassed and threatened. And in addition, some rules have changed. In some cases, those rules have slightly modified how people vote. In actuality, for most voters, they're going to find that their access to mail voting and early voting, for instance, is going to be very similar as 2020 and 2021. So despite some of the rhetoric that's happening on both sides, it's actually for most voters going to be very, very similar to what they experienced in the past, and perhaps even a tiny bit better. For a reason that's outside anyone's control, which is that the pandemic has receded to some degree. COVID is not as much of a concern. It hasn't gone away, but it is not as much of a concern as it has been in the past. What is of particular concern are efforts to weaken some of the guardrails of democracy around the counting and certification of the ballots process. And that is post-election mostly. Poll watchers have been weaponized in states like Texas. They can now interfere with the process in ways that they never have been able to before. There have been efforts to kind of place more power and discretion in the hands of highly partisan election officials that I don't think is going to change the outcome of races or affect it, but it's going to give the appearance that partisan outcomes are possible. It's really hard in this country because of our strong judicial system to anoint the loser of an election as the winner. The person who actually won isn't just going to sit back and let that happen. They're going to file a lawsuit. And because we have so many paper ballots and we have transparent processes, there's going to be a lot of evidence to support their claim. That's very hard to do. What's less difficult to do, and what I am more concerned about, is that in the period of time of uncertainty, that the losing candidates are going to incite violence. We've seen this in the past. We've seen some rhetoric around that in 2022. And so I'm not predicting this, but we're going to have to keep a close watch on the period of time in November and December of 2022 to see if anyone exploits any uncertainties that might exist to incite violence in particular areas.
Well, that's a scary thought. All right, when we come back after the break, I'm going to ask our guest about foreign interference in our election. It was a big issue in the past. Is it a big issue in 2022? In just a moment. Sometimes elections are momentous, heralding big changes in ideology, policy, and direction. And sometimes elections are just mid-course corrections, a reminder not to overreach. And then sometimes elections are just a way to shuffle the deck, bring in some new people, get rid of some old people, and spruce up the look and feel of the country. We all remember the momentous votes, Kennedy over Nixon, Reagan over Carter, for example. But the lesser elections are often a blur. They deserve to be remembered if only because they didn't herald a dramatic shift. And midterm elections, such as the one we are about to have, often fit this category. Here are three. 1994 midterm, huge Republican victory as the GOP captured both houses of Congress for the first time in 42 years. But did this signal Republican victory and the presidential vote 2 years later? No. Bill Clinton swept to a second term. Or the 1998 midterms, a Democratic success, marking the first time an incumbent Democrats party gained seats in the House of Representatives in a midterm election since 1934. But did this success lay the groundwork for another Democrat to win the next presidential election? No. George W. Bush won a disputed squeaker against Al Gore in 2000. And then the 2002 midterms, held just 14 months after September 11th, and with a brewing storm over Iraq, this election ran against the historic norm in that the incumbents party, the Republicans, gained seats in both the House and the Senate. This is a perfect example of how external events shaped the context of the election, something that doesn't seem to be the case this year. We have lots of elections in America. These are just three that had an impact, but were not historic. Will 2022 fit in this category? Watch the vote. Again, my guest today is David J. Becker. David is the founder and executive director of the Center for Election Innovation and Research, a nonprofit organization that seeks to ensure that all eligible voters participate in our democratic process as easily and conveniently as possible, and with the maximum confidence in the integrity of our electoral system. He's the author of the just published Big Truth, Upholding Democracy in the Age of the Big Lie. David built this center after working on elections and voting rights with the Pew Charitable Trust and the Justice Department's Office of Civil Rights. All right, David, let me ask you about foreign interference, the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, someone else. Is it a big issue that we should be worried about in the 2022 election?
It continues to be a significant issue. The Department of Homeland Security has indicated there's no indication of heightened effort right now to spread disinformation by foreign governments, but that means there's still an effort going on. That effort was probably reached its peak in 2016, where we know foreign governments were behind a lot of disinformation being spread in the United States, sought to widen the divisions between people and spread disinformation that would make them distrust election outcomes if their candidate lost. In large part, that disinformation over time leading up to 2016 wasn't all that successful. It had some successes in 2016, of course. But what we've seen since 2016 is that domestic actors have been the primary source of disinformation, even coming from the White House itself during the Trump administration. And that has been a major problem. It has made the job of foreign adversaries, autocratic adversaries, adversaries who want to weaken world democracy and American democracy. It's made their job much easier because they no longer need to create content. They just need to amplify content that's already coming from domestic actors. So the domestic actors that are spreading disinformation, including the former president and people who surround him, are achieving something that foreign adversaries had tried for decades to achieve. I mean, if you look back at the Soviet Union and the Chinese Communist Party, they have tried over decades to make Americans think that democracy could not serve them as a form of government. It could not serve their citizens properly, that they needed a strong central authoritarian government. That failed. And yet we're seeing now domestic actors spread that message much more effectively than we've ever seen foreign adversaries do. And foreign adversaries are probably sitting back and enjoying that to some degree and are able to turn down perhaps their disinformation apparatus and just amplify and spread stuff that's already happening here in the United States.
So if you're focused on the threat of sort of domestic sources of misinformation, disinformation, are there things that you would like to see say our major media companies or online platforms be doing more effectively than they are doing in order to protect Americans from this sort of disinformation?
I think first we have to recognize that the media actually is doing a lot better at this than they used to. The 2020 election was actually a very well-reported election. We remember things like there was a new effect in 2020 where it was called the red mirage and the blue wave, where it might appear that Republicans were winning on election day, but we knew there were ballots still out to be counted that were mostly mail ballots. And because President Trump had delegitimized mail voting, for the first time in history, mail ballots, which previously skewed slightly Republican, were going to be overwhelmingly Democratic, and we anticipated that. And the media reported that very well, and most voters were ready for it when it happened. That didn't stop, of course, the losing presidential candidate from still trying to exploit that to breed doubt. So the media is doing a better job. Most media organizations now have democracy desks that are reporting on the process and trying to educate and inform people. I personally tend to be someone who believes that the solution to bad speech is more good speech, but certainly the platforms, social media, could probably do a better job of regulating clearly false information about the election process. I would love to see more direction towards trusted sources, particularly to election officials who are reporting in a nonpartisan informational way what the actual processes are. But I think the number one thing we really need to do to ensure accurate information is spread is to hold those who are spreading disinformation accountable, where they violate criminal laws by spreading disinformation that could lead to criminal penalties under existing laws. We should charge them, we should prosecute them, and we should put them in jail. And when they violate civil laws here in the United States and may incur civil liability, they should be held accountable and have to pay a judgment. Lawyers who spread lies in court should have to lose their bar license. The good news is some of this is happening right now. There are active investigations ongoing. There are active civil lawsuits ongoing. There are lawyers who have lied to courts who are currently under investigation or have had their law license suspended. I speak of this as a lawyer. So it's that accountability is going to be very, very important. While there is a First Amendment in the United States and there is free speech, and that free speech in many cases, particularly in the political realm, includes the right to spread some degree of lies, when those lies create an outcome that is against the law, that is a different situation, and those people should be held accountable.
Terrific. David Becker, thank you so much for helping put our election system in context for all of our viewers overseas here on Dakhel, Washington. Americans may be consumed with our domestic legislative elections, but the rest of the world is consumed with weightier things. Sure, What happens in Pennsylvania and Arizona, Ohio, Florida, Georgia, and New Mexico matters. But it doesn't matter nearly as much as what is happening in two proud countries where truly remarkable women and men are fighting and dying for their freedom. In Ukraine, we're seeing the most amazing show of national spirit, grit, and determination in decades. Every time the Russians try something new, whether it be missiles ravaging civilian areas or sham elections to validate illegal annexation of territory, the Ukrainians respond with the currency that matters: victory on the battlefield. The war is not over by any means. Facing embarrassment and pushed into a corner, Putin may do the unthinkable and go for broke, using weapons of mass destruction, or expanding the war to NATO territory, or employing some other crazy tactic. We and others in the West may be providing arms, but the Ukrainians are doing everything else, providing their lives. And what they have done will go down in history as truly amazing. Shame on those in our political system, which includes a shamefully high number of Republican elected officials who still have some sympathy for the bloodthirsty dictator in the Kremlin and who heap insult on the Churchillian figure leading the fight in Kyiv. And in Iran, we are seeing something equally amazing. The women of that long-suffering country, supported by and partnered with men, declaring that they are mad as hell and will no longer take orders from the clerical elite to cover their bodies, shut their mouths, and obey commands. Images of girls and women directly confronting the president of Iran. Images of women and girls denouncing the morality police and the street thugs of the Basij. Images of women and girls facing bullets, clubs, and death for demanding their dignity and their freedom. This strikes at the heart of mullah rule and poses the most serious threat to the reign of the Ayatollahs since Khomeini first brought down the dark veil of oppression on the people of Iran more than 40 years ago. In my view, shame on those in our political system, which includes some who see a nuclear deal as a higher priority or who may be leery of popular revolution after seeing the Arab Spring turn into an Islamist or autocratic winter a decade ago. Shame on them for not doing everything possible to express solidarity with the brave women and men of Iran, which should include, in my view, steps to increase the cost to every official of that regime and their families for participating and abetting the suffering of the Iranian people. This is the moment to act in their support, just as this is the moment not to let up in our backing of the brave Ukrainian people. So keep one eye on our election results, following all the twists and turns of voting and vote counting, but keep the other eye on the world. Our local elections are filled with drama, but in historic terms, it means little compared to the drama playing out in the cities, towns, and villages of Ukraine and Iran. وصلنا إلى ختام الحلقة من برنامج داخل واشنطن. إذا كان لديكم أي استفسارات أو تعليقات حول هذه الحلقة وخاصة حول تأثير قوانين الانتخابات الجديدة على التصويت في شهر نوفمبر، تواصلوا معي رجاء عبر تويتر على هاشتاج Inside Washington أو تراسلوني مباشرة على @RobSatloff. نراكم الأسبوع القادم وإلى القادم، شكرا وإلى اللقاء.